here with Peter Williams, and we're talking apologetics. And one of the things that he is an expert in is biblical studies and various languages, and I'm sure lots of other things that I don't even know about. But tell us some of the things going on in biblical studies that's helping Christians in being able to defend their faith.
Well, I think there are different things sometimes meant by biblical studies, and there are certain forms of academic biblical studies that I don't think build up the church at all. But I do think that really getting to grips with the scriptures in their original languages and studying them analytically is a very important thing to do. When we think about those we perhaps trace ourselves from as evangelicals, be it Luther, be it Calvin, be it Wesley, all three of those people had a real facility in the biblical languages. I mean, not many people know that Wesley actually translated a handbook on the text of the New Testament, the actual manuscripts and what readings you should have from Latin into English. He's actually quite a scholar in his own right, and I think people don't appreciate that. So when we look at people who have really helped shape society, helped shape the church in the past, they have been people who have been so passionate about the scriptures, they have wanted to dedicate themselves to studying them deeply, and then things have flowed out from that. So I do think that we need to have church leaders and Christian leaders being more steeped in the scriptures and more equipped to analyze them. Now, obviously with the scriptures we want to listen to them, which means we meditate upon them day and night, we think about how they apply to us. But there's also, I think, analysis of it, where you actually try and work out the rules that you use to apply the scriptures. You're actually going to count the number of times particular words occur and those sorts of things in order to get a better grip on exactly what God's saying to us. And I think that's the sort of thing that we need to get people to do more of.
One of the things I've seen is when people tend to think of apologetics, a lot of times it's philosophers that are at least they first think of a famous apologist being a philosophers. But I see more and more interest coming from biblical studies. Maybe it's because some of the skeptics that are questioning the Bible are from a biblical studies perspective. But what are some kind of gains, or what are some things you've seen come out of biblical studies that have helped Christians more recently here? What are some of the things about the Gospels or other things you've seen?
Well, I think sometimes what happens is you have to have an error first before there's a desire to correct it. And one of the things that's grown up since 1945, when people discovered some Gnostic writings in Egypt, which in a place called Nag Hammadi, which became known as Apocryphal Gospels, is there's been a whole movement to say, why have we got the 4 Gospels in the Bible? Why shouldn't we have all these other Gospels? And for quite a few decades, evangelicals essentially left that to others to sort out. And as a result, you ended up with some voices that were really quite imbalanced in that area. And in more recent years, evangelicals have entered that area. Tom Wright has written in the area, Craig Evans has written in the area, and I think supremely Simon Gathercole, who's actually a friend of mine in Cambridge, has written quite a lot in this area. And one of the things we see about these Gospels is what wonderful evidence they are for the 4 Gospels. Because, for instance, some of them are using the 4 Gospels. What they also do is they give you a very good control sample of what happens when someone makes up a story. You find they just don't have geographical references right. They have very few, in fact. They don't tell you a Jewish story, whereas the 4 Gospels are extremely Jewish when you study them. So you start seeing what happens when people make up stories later on. And so I think that can be very good evidence for the 4 Gospels.
Yeah. So one of the things you've been talking about is original languages. And so what are some other things that you would tell a 19-year-old Liberty student who's saying, I want to do apologetics? What should they do? What advice would you have?
Well, I think the very first thing is to really familiarize yourself with the scriptures. So read them quite a few times over, familiarize yourself, think about any problems that there might be. within Scripture and go looking for answers so you can respond to those, and start thinking about how it all fits together. Because I think one of the most compelling arguments for the Scriptures are the Scriptures themselves, and that they are so written that the more you trust them, the more you will find within them to be trustworthy. That is, there's a sort of reward system built into that. So I think that's a foundation point. There are different sorts of apologists, some more emphasizing philosophy. I actually think that Christians have made great strides in philosophy in the last few decades. We haven't made the same strides with the integrity of the Bible, and that's where we need people who have an eye for a good apologetic argument going into that. In terms of reading, I would say that there are some good books out there. One that springs to mind is by my friend Ken Kitchen, just called On the Reliability of the Old Testament. It's not a perfect book, he wouldn't claim it was, and I differ with it on a number of points, but it's a very good starting point for getting you into the idea of looking at ancient archaeological evidence and the Old Testament. Very good. Now, tell our viewers what it is exactly that you do in Cambridge. Can you just describe that? Well, I do many things, but if we start with my institution, which is Tyndale House. Tyndale House is one of the best libraries of the Bible in the world, and it's a residential library. So people come from around the world to study the Bible there. We have lots and lots of passionate Christian believers who are studying the Scriptures together at a very high level, almost all at the doctoral level or above. We have about 50 of them at any one time, which is a lot. So a lot of brain power, but this is brain connected to the heart and wanting to serve the church. So from that, all sorts of writings come out. And I have the privilege of leading that institution and also going around both teaching in university context and also speaking in church context as well. Yeah, very good. So perhaps Liberty can get some students into various PhD programs, perhaps at Cambridge, and stay at Tyndale House and studying with those guys. That'd be great. That'd be great. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.